Chosen one, a silent trap is set, and you're walking into it without knowing it now. Have you ever wondered why, just as things seem to be aligning, a strange resistance rises up against you? Quiet, unseen, and yet unmistakably real. You do not trip over it, you do not hear it snap shut, and still you feel its pressure around your steps. There are dangers in this world that roar like lions, announcing themselves long before they strike. But there are others, far more dangerous, that whisper, that wait, that smile politely while digging a pit beneath your feet. It is this second kind that concerns us now. For the most effective trap is never the one you fear. It is the one you dismiss. It is the one dressed in familiarity, routine, and good intentions. It does not rush you, it invites you. It does not command, it agrees. And before you realize what has happened, you find that your freedom has narrowed, your courage has thinned, and your once clear sense of calling has grown strangely quiet. Not silenced by force, but muffled by comfort. You see, a trap does not require evil-looking materials to function. It only requires misdirection. A man walking toward a cliff at night does not need to be pushed if his eyes are fixed on the wrong stars. In the same way, a chosen soul does not need to be attacked outright if they can be gently guided to look everywhere except where they are going. Distraction, after all, is far cheaper than destruction, and far more reliable. What makes this moment especially dangerous is that the trap is not set for everyone. It is not laid across the whole road. It is measured to your stride, shaped to your habits, and timed to your season. Ordinary paths will not ensnare an extraordinary calling. The net must be woven with threads of your own thoughts, your own doubts, your own unspoken fears. That is why it feels so natural. That is why it feels like your own idea. You may have noticed it already. A slow compromise that does not look like surrender, a delay that pretends to be wisdom, a silence that disguises itself as patience. None of these are sins in themselves. That is precisely the point. A trap made of obvious wickedness would never catch a vigilant heart, but a trap made of almost right choices, nearly true beliefs, and half-awakened intentions can hold even the strongest soul without a sound. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that danger does not always announce itself with darkness. Sometimes it comes dressed as light that is slightly off-center. It offers you rest when you are meant to move, explanation when you are meant to trust, and analysis when you are meant to obey. It asks you to wait just a little longer, until the moment passes and the door quietly closes. And here is the most sobering truth: the trap does not hate you. It does not need to. Indifference is sufficient. A machine does not rage at the bird. It simply functions as designed. In the same way, systems of thought, patterns of behavior, and unexamined habits do not plot with malice. They merely do what they always do, unless someone wakes up and steps aside. You were not chosen because you are flawless. You were chosen because you were meant to see. And seeing in this hour requires more than intelligence. It requires honesty, the kind that admits when something feels slightly wrong, even though it looks entirely reasonable. The kind that questions why your fire has dimmed without a clear cause, why your prayers feel crowded with noise, why urgency has been replaced by endless preparation. A silent trap relies on one fatal assumption, that tomorrow will always provide another chance to notice it. But awareness delayed is awareness denied. By the time the danger feels obvious, it has usually already done its quiet work. The heart has adjusted, the conscience has learned to whisper instead of speak, the calling has learned to wait in a corner. This is not meant to frighten you, but to awaken you, for the very fact that you can sense something unseen suggests that you are not yet caught. There is still movement in your spirit, still a discomfort that refuses to settle, and discomfort, when rightly understood, is often mercy in its earliest form. The first and most effective movement of a silent trap is not force, but persuasion. It does not push you away from your purpose. It slowly convinces you to step aside from it on your own. It speaks in reasonable tones, using language that sounds wise, cautious, even spiritual. It tells you that now is not the right time, that you need more information, more confirmation, more preparation before you act. And because you value discernment, you listen. You tell yourself you are being careful, not fearful. Yet somewhere beneath that carefulness, something vital begins to stall. This is how distraction learns to wear the mask of wisdom. True wisdom sharpens focus, false wisdom scatters it. The trap does not demand that you abandon your calling, only that you divide your attention until your calling grows faint from neglect. You begin to think about everything except the one thing you were meant to do now. You analyze motives, revisit old wounds, rehearse imaginary outcomes, and call this process maturity. All the while, clarity waits patiently for obedience that never quite arrives. There is a subtle shift that happens when this trap begins to close. What once felt urgent now feels optional. What once burned within you now feels negotiable. You still believe in the truth, but you no longer move in it. You still speak the language of faith, but your steps no longer match your words. This is not rebellion, it is delay. And delay is powerful because it does not feel dangerous. It feels responsible. The trap feeds on your strengths, not your weaknesses. If you are thoughtful, it gives you too much to think about. If you are compassionate, it burdens you with everyone else's need. Until you forget your own assignment. If you are disciplined, it traps you in preparation without action. You remain busy, engaged, and outwardly committed, yet inwardly you are standing still. Nothing looks wrong, which is why everything is at risk. What makes this especially effective is that the trap rarely introduces anything new. It simply rearranges what is already there. The same routines, the same relationships, the same responsibilities, only now they take precedence over the quiet inner, prompting you once recognized instantly. The voice does not disappear, it is crowded out. And because there is no dramatic fall, no obvious failure, you assume all is well. At some point, you may notice a strange fatigue, not the kind that comes from honest labor, but the weariness that comes from movement without progress. You are tired, yet you cannot point to a battle you have fought. You feel drained, yet nothing has truly happened. This is often the sign that your energy is being spent maintaining a position you were never meant to stay in. Standing still against a calling requires more effort than walking forward in it. The silent trap also reshapes your sense of risk. Obedience begins to feel reckless, while inaction feels safe. You start to associate peace with avoidance and anxiety with courage. But peace that comes from avoidance is temporary and shallow. It must be constantly defended, constantly justified. Courage, on the other hand, often feels uncomfortable at first, because it demands alignment rather than comfort. You may tell yourself that when the moment is right, you will know. But the truth is, the moment often becomes right only after you move. Clarity is not always a reward for waiting. Sometimes it is a result of obedience. The trap knows this, which is why it encourages endless observation instead of decisive steps. As long as you are watching, measuring, and considering, you are not advancing. There is a dangerous assumption hidden beneath all of this, that you are losing nothing by waiting. But every delay shapes you, habits form, tolerances adjust. What once felt wrong begins to feel normal simply because it has been endured long enough. The trap does not need to close completely, it only needs to remain comfortable enough that you stop trying to leave. Yet the very awareness of this pattern is evidence that you are not meant to stay within it. The unease you feel is not confusion, it is recognition. Something within you remembers motion, purpose, alignment, and that memory refuses to be silenced, even when surrounded by reasonable excuses. The second movement of a silent trap is the gradual reshaping of your inner voice. It does not erase truth, it distorts the way you hear it. What was once a clear conviction becomes a quiet suggestion, and what was once a warning becomes a mild discomfort you learn to tolerate. The trap understands that if it can change how you interpret your own thoughts, it will never need to silence you from the outside. You will do the work yourself. At first, the change is almost unnoticeable. You still feel a check in your spirit when something is off, but you explain it away. You tell yourself you are being overly sensitive, too intense, too serious. You begin to mistrust your own discernment, especially when it disrupts your plans or challenges your comfort. Slowly you start to value calmness over clarity, agreement over truth, and peacekeeping over honesty. This is where rationalization becomes dangerous. Reason is a gift, but when it is severed from truth, it becomes a tool of avoidance. You can explain almost anything if you try hard enough. You can justify staying where you are by pointing to responsibilities, expectations, or the fear of misunderstanding. You can convince yourself that silence is wisdom and that waiting is humility, even when both are rooted in fear. The trap does not argue with you, it lets you argue with yourself. Over time, the inner dialogue changes its tone. What once said, "This is not right," now says, "It's not ideal, but it's manageable." What once said, "You must act," now says, "You can address this later." Later becomes a convenient sanctuary, where convictions are sent to rest, rarely to return. And because nothing collapses immediately, you assume the compromise is harmless. One of the most subtle effects of this process is the way it alters your perception of truth. Truth begins to feel harsh, rigid, even unloving. Comfort, on the other hand, starts to feel kind and merciful. You begin to believe that protecting feelings is more important than protecting alignment. Yet truth has never been cruel, it has only been demanding. It demands that you live in reality rather than illusion, even when illusion feels gentler. The trap also teaches you to speak to yourself in ways you would never speak to someone else. You diminish your own calling, downplay your responsibility, and minimize the cost of inaction. You tell yourself that others are more qualified, more prepared, more deserving of the moment than you are. This false humility sounds noble, but it quietly erodes courage. You shrink not because you are unworthy, but because you have learned to doubt the significance of what you carry. As this continues, you may notice that your prayers change. They become safer, less specific, less daring. You ask for guidance without intending to follow it, for clarity without intending to move. The inner voice, once alive with expectation, grows cautious. You stop asking uncomfortable questions because you already know the answers they will bring. Silence becomes a form of self-protection. The most dangerous part is that this transformation feels like growth. You appear more composed, less reactive, more balanced. Others may even praise your maturity. But inwardly, something essential is being muted. Fire is not meant to be controlled into stillness, it is meant to be directed. When fire is suppressed instead of guided, it does not disappear. It smolders, producing smoke that clouds vision and weakens resolve. The trap succeeds when you no longer recognize the difference between peace and numbness. Peace strengthens you. Numbness merely dulls the pain of misalignment. You begin to accept a life that is manageable rather than meaningful, stable rather than alive. And because the discomfort is gradual, you adapt to it, forgetting that you were made for more than endurance. Yet even here, the trap is not complete. The inner voice may be quieter, but it is not gone. Truth has a way of surviving beneath layers of explanation and excuse. It waits for moments of stillness, moments when distraction fades and honesty returns. And in those moments, you feel it again. That gentle but persistent reminder that something within you has been settling for less than it was designed to become. The third movement of a silent trap is the slow isolation of your purpose from your daily life. It does not demand that you deny what you believe. It simply encourages you to compartmentalize it. Your convictions are allowed to exist, but only in controlled spaces, private thoughts, ocasio, null reflections, or carefully chosen moments. They are no longer permitted to interrupt your schedule, challenge your habits, or inconvenience your relationships. In this way, your calling becomes an idea rather than a living force. At first, this separation feels harmless. You tell yourself that not every moment needs to be intense, that balance is healthy, that life requires flexibility. And this is partly true, but balance becomes distortion when the most important thing is treated as optional. What you once lived from now becomes something you visit. You return to it when you have time, when you feel inspired, when circumstances are favorable. Until then, it waits quietly, growing weaker from lack of use. The trap is especially effective here because it works with time rather than against it. Time, when neglected, does the work of erosion. A single missed moment means little. Repeated postponement, however, reshapes priorities. What is practiced becomes natural. What is neglected becomes unfamiliar. Slowly, the language of purpose begins to sound distant, almost foreign, like a dialect you once spoke fluently but now must translate. As this continues, you may notice that your actions no longer flow from your convictions but run parallel to them. You believe one thing and live another, not out of hypocrisy, but out of disconnection. The two paths never fully intersect. You tell yourself that someday they will align again, when life settles down, when responsibilities lie. At 10, when conditions improve. But life rarely simplifies on its own. Alignment is not something time grants, it is something choice restores. This division creates a peculiar kind of tension. You are not at peace, but you are not in open conflict either. There is a dull pressure beneath the surface, a sense that something is unfinished. You feel it most in quiet moments, when distractions fall away and the weight of incompleteness makes itself known. Yet because the discomfort is not sharp, you learn to live with it, convincing yourself that this is simply how adulthood feels. The trap deepens by normalizing this state. You look around and see others doing the same, managing lives that are functional but disconnected from deeper meaning. Comparison dulls urgency. If everyone else seems to be surviving just fine without full alignment, you wonder why you should expect more, and so the extraordinary begins to feel unrealistic, even childish. You trade vision for practicality and call it wisdom. One of the most subtle losses in this stage is joy, not pleasure, not entertainment, but the quiet joy that comes from coherence, when what you believe, what you choose, and what you do move in the same direction. Without this coherence, even success feels thin. Achievements bring relief, rather than satisfaction. Rest feels restless. You are busy, yet strangely unfulfilled. The trap also distorts your sense of responsibility. You begin to believe that your purpose is separate from ordinary life, something reserved for special seasons or ideal circumstances. But purpose was never meant to be an addition to life. It was meant to shape it. When it is removed from daily decisions, it loses its power to transform them. You continue making choices, but they are guided by convenience rather than conviction. Over time, this separation makes re-entry more difficult. The longer something is unused, the more intimidating it becomes. You start to doubt whether you still know how to live from that place of clarity and courage. Fear grows not from failure, but from unfamiliarity. The trap counts on this hesitation, knowing that what feels difficult today will feel impossible tomorrow if left untouched. And yet, the very ache you feel is evidence that the separation is not natural. You were not designed to live divided. Purpose is not a burden to be managed, but a current meant to carry you forward. When it is isolated, everything else must be forced. And the exhaustion that follows is not a sign that you are weak, but that you have been walking without the strength that comes from alignment. The fourth movement of a silent trap is the gradual rewriting of your expectations. It teaches you to anticipate less, to hope cautiously, and to prepare yourself for disappointment as though it were wisdom. At first, this appears sensible. You have been hurt before. You have seen plans fail and promises collapse. So you learn to lower your gaze, not in humility, but in self-prot. Action. You tell yourself that expecting too much only leads to pain, and that it is better to be pleasantly surprised than deeply wounded. This adjustment feels mature, even prudent. You begin to admire restraint and distrust boldness. Passion starts to look naive, conviction unrealistic. You become suspicious of any inner stirring that asks you to believe again. Yet hope was never meant to be reckless fantasy, it was meant to be disciplined trust. When hope is diminished, so is courage, because courage always draws its strength from the belief that something meaningful is still possible. The trap works by confusing disappointment with truth. Past failure is treated as prophecy. Because something did not work before, you assume it will not work now. Because someone did not respond, you assume no one will. Because a door closed, you conclude that all doors are locked. This logic feels reasonable, but it quietly denies the possibility of change. It turns experience into a ceiling rather than a teacher. As expectations shrink, so does your willingness to risk obedience. You begin to choose what is predictable over what is purposeful. You aim for stability rather than alignment. Safety becomes the highest good, even if it costs you depth. You tell yourself that this is simply how life works, that wisdom is learning to accept limitations. But there is a difference between accepting limits and surrendering vision. One grounds you, the other confines you. This shift also alters how you interpret delay. Instead of seeing it as preparation or redirection, you see it as confirmation that you were wrong to expect anything at all. Waiting becomes a quiet form of resignation. You stop asking why something has not happened and start assuming that it never will. The future narrows until it looks very much like the present, only longer. The trap deepens by rewarding lowered expectations with temporary comfort. When you expect little, you are rarely disappointed. You feel a sense of control because you have reduced the range of outcomes, but this comfort is deceptive. It is the comfort of a heart that has learned to brace itself rather than open itself. It protects you from pain, but it also protects you from possibility. One of the most subtle effects of this process is the way it reshapes your imagination. You stop envisioning what could be and start rehearsing what has already been. Creativity gives way to caution. Dreams are edited before they are even fully formed. You dismiss them as impractical, irresponsible, or untimely. The trap does not forbid dreaming. It simply teaches you to do it quietly, without expectation, until even you stop believing your own dreams matter. This change often goes unnoticed because it is praised by the world. Modesty of expectation is called realism. Restraint is called wisdom. Emotional distance is called strength. Yet strength that refuses to hope is not strength at all, it is endurance without direction. You may survive this way, but you do not fully live. As expectations diminish, gratitude also changes its tone. Instead of being rooted in abundance, it becomes rooted in relief. You are grateful not because life is full, but because it is manageable. This is not ingratitude, but it is a thin version of gratitude, one that has forgotten how to rejoice. Joy requires expectation. It arises when hope meets fulfillment. Without hope, even fulfillment feels muted, and still, beneath all this caution, something within you resists complete surrender. There remains a quiet awareness that you were not designed to live with your eyes always on the ground. You were meant to look up, not in denial of hardship, but in defiance of it. The trap may teach you to expect less, but it cannot erase the deeper truth that expectation rightly placed is not foolishness, it is faith exercised in advance. The fifth movement of a silent trap is the normalization of misalignment. It convinces you that living slightly out of step with your deepest convictions is not only unavoidable, but acceptable. At first, the distance is small, barely noticeable. You tell yourself that no one lives in perfect alignment, that compromise is simply part of being human, and while it is true that perfection is not required, honesty is. The trap depends on blurring that distinction. This misalignment does not arrive as open conflict, it arrives as tolerance. You tolerate patterns that once troubled you, attitudes you once questioned, environments you once felt uneasy about. None of them seems serious enough to confront, so you let them remain. Over time, what is tolerated becomes familiar, and what is familiar becomes normal. The inner tension that once served as a warning slowly fades, not because the issue has resolved, but because your sensitivity has adapted. As this state becomes habitual, you begin to reorganize your values to match your behavior rather than adjusting your behavior to match your values. This is a subtle but profound shift. Instead of asking whether something is right, you ask whether it is manageable. Instead of seeking alignment, you seek justification. Language changes. What was once called compromise is now called balance. What was once called avoidance is now called patience. The trap does not force you to lie, it teaches you to rename. One of the most dangerous aspects of normalized misalignment is that it feels stable. There is no crisis demanding change, no sharp pain forcing attention. Life continues. Responsibilities are met. From the outside, everything appears functional. But inwardly, there is a quiet dullness, a sense that something essential has been traded for convenience. You are not in despair, but you are not fully alive either. The trap also alters your sense of identity. You begin to define yourself by what you can sustain, rather than by what you were called to embody. You become proud of endurance, of resilience, of being able to carry on despite inner conflict. Endurance has its place, but when it becomes a substitute for alignment, it turns into slow erosion. You survive, but at the cost of coherence. As misalignment becomes normal, the idea of change starts to feel disruptive. You imagine the discomfort it would cause, the explanations it would require, the resistance it might provoke. Remaining as you are feels easier than the upheaval of realignment. The trap counts on this inertia. It knows that the longer you remain out of step, the heavier the thought of stepping back into alignment will feel. This stage is often marked by a quiet grief you cannot easily name. You sense a loss, but you struggle to identify what has been lost. Nothing obvious is missing, yet something irreplaceable feels absent. This grief is not about external circumstances, it is about distance from yourself. You miss the version of you who moved with clarity, who chose with conviction, who did not need to explain away the unease of compromise. The trap deepens by convincing you that this grief is simply nostalgia, an unrealistic longing for an earlier season. You tell yourself that growth means letting go of intensity, that maturity means settling into what is sustainable. But growth was never meant to shrink you. Maturity was never meant to dim you. What has been lost is not youth or idealism, but alignment, the harmony between who you are and how you live. Yet even here, normalization is not final. Misalignment can become familiar, but it never becomes fulfilling. The quiet dissatisfaction you feel is not ingratitude, it is a signal. It is the remaining evidence that you were not designed to live divided. That signal persists because alignment is not a luxury for the chosen, it is their lifeline. And no matter how long you have lived out of step, the possibility of realignment remains, waiting for the moment when tolerance gives way to truth.